Side Part. It's like a book club with your best friend, but make it a podcast. Welcome back, crawlers, to another episode of Side Part. I'm Nikki, your bookish bestie, and today we are going to continue our crawl through book number 6 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, The Eye of the Bedlam Bride by Matt Dinniman. Today's episode is going to focus on the entirety of Part 2, The Father, but I've also covered the first 5 books already in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. So if you're interested in checking out those episodes, I will go ahead and link them down in the description below. But remember, you are reading along with me. I have not read ahead in this series. So all of my thoughts, theories, reactions are just based on parts 1 and 2 of book 6 and the first 5 books in this series, which also means there will be spoilers up to this point. So up to part 2 of book 6. And please keep in mind, these are very adult books with some very adult scenes. I will do my best to keep it PG-13 for little ears, but please be mindful of your audience at home. And now it is time for the Guild Report. Truthfully, this is probably my favorite addition to this podcast because it's where I get to revisit your comments from the previous week. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason as to what I choose from the comment section. It could be an answer to a question I had, correcting something I got wrong, highlighting a fun theory. It truly doesn't matter. It's just, if it snagged my attention and I want to include it, I do. The first comment that I wanted to talk about had to do with the Bedlam Bride and Carl. And someone said, I assume Carl's weakness to the fifth eye and what she and Maria sees in him is the fact that despite his strong front, he is a very, very broken person. His savior complex is actually his fear of being abandoned. I should say, I used to feel like Carl had a savior complex, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I just am not so sure anymore. I think Carl has a boatload of trauma, that is for sure. But I think, and this might be reductionist, but I feel like Carl himself is just trying to leave the world a little bit better than he experienced it. Like, try to be better to others with the hope that maybe that trickles out. And I think he's just at his core just trying to be a good person. But sorry, let's get back to the comment. His savior complex is actually his fear of being abandoned. His willingness to be the one to sacrifice for others is in his race towards self-destruction. And we've already seen his rage. She and Maria is like a cat seeing something shiny sitting on a precipice, waiting for the right moment to give Carl the slightest push. And I would agree. And I agreed with this comment that his savior complex is actually like derived from like this strong abandonment wound. And with this, like, God, this penchant for self-destruction and with his rage, I feel like the Bedlam Bride has latched onto something. And, you know, as much as Carl, I feel like, is using the Bedlam Bride as a tool, I think she's using him as one as well. And I'm really interested to see what's going to happen on the next floor between him and the Bedlam Bride. We shall see. So one, thank you for sharing this summary, because I think you put into words like what I was feeling, and kind of, I couldn't quite put into words like what their connection was. I knew there was a connection there, but I think I was having a really hard time piecing that together. So thank you. And I have to admit, and I've said this before, but I'm usually reading these books like in the early hours of the morning. I'm talking like 2, 3 a.m. Because as I've shared before, I'm a mom with 3 kids and I do miss things. So as always, I have no embarrassment. And when you correct me on things, I actually think it's great and it helps me make this series better. So as we're moving through this episode, if you want to drop a comment on things I maybe didn't get quite right, things I should think about a little bit more, or maybe things I should dive into a little bit deeper, please, please, please drop them down in the comments below. The second and final comment I wanted to highlight, I've gotten this one before, but it was very applicable, I feel like, particularly in this part. And it says, for the future, just pay attention to the cookbook entries. Oh my, I have gotten this comment, I know at least once before, if not more than that. And so I'm like, okay, I hear you. It's important. I get it. It's important. And I have not admittedly done the best job in the past. I've been trying to be better about it. But there were 2 that definitely stood out to me in these chapters. So the first was note added by Crawler Milk, 6th edition. Okay, before I even get to the actual like Crawler entry, the cookbook entry from Crawler Milk. Okay, his name, or her, it could be a her. I don't know if it has a gender in there. I feel like that's important. I feel like, was that what Rosetta was referencing with the weird like milk soup thing? Potato and milk stew? I don't know. I feel like that's intentional. That's important. I feel like there's some connection there. Is this yet another crawler that's out in the wild trying to work against the overall system? I don't know. But the entry said, "Holy underworlds on high." That last fight, I can't even describe it. What the F, what the F, what the F. And I just think the entry itself did not seem that important, but the name of the crawler felt very important. And again, if I'm off base, let me know. There's also another note by crawler Drachia, and it was in the 22nd edition. So I think something that's important is like, I necessarily didn't pay attention to the edition number when I was looking at these entries until more recently, and kind of seeing like the gaps in between the crawlers. I feel like that's also important. But crawler Drachia said, "The voice that runs this world has been getting stranger and stranger in its words and rulings. I believe it is moving into the minds of these monsters, taking them over, but just at the point of death. It's as if it's desperately attempting to know what it's like to lose it all. But it keeps failing, so it keeps trying. Its frustration grows. If only I could convince it to move into the minds of one of those Nagas." Okay, so interesting. I think what obviously Crawler Drachia is talking about is the AI just trying to experience what it's like to kind of, experience death and loss and like very human emotions, right? And I'm wondering if this is hinting at towards where the AI might be progressing or going, especially as it starts going primal. Obviously, that's important because, gosh, the AI, I feel like a huge piece, especially in this part in this book, even maybe in the last book, is the AI is just growing its consciousness. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but shortly after the AI introduces the boss turkey, Tom, it says, "Funny, isn't it, how things can be bred in a way that makes it so those holding a butcher knife are less likely to face their own revulsions. There's no point to this. Just an observation. I've been doing that a lot lately. Observing things, noticing them. It's all right there if you look long enough." The AI is very much a character in this book, and it feels very much like a person. And I think the more the AI, we see it's starting to be able to go into the bodies of different like avatars within the dungeon. And it's like not above being this like elusive presence anymore, but it's starting to really interact with Carl. Because as it gives these really lengthy descriptions where it's talking about its observations and things that it's seeing, I think Carl at one point laments about the fact, like under his breath, and he's just like, "Oh my gosh, can we get like the normal descriptions back?" To which the AI takes offense and kind of hints at like, "I'm doing this for you. Like, I'm stopping time, giving you time to like process. I'm doing this all for you." And gosh, I just feel like the level of investment by the AI just feels bigger and deeper and intentional and highly, highly personal. And this has just become such a prevalent theme throughout this entire book. There's also this moment, it's right before the Hydra battle. The AI makes an announcement and says, "The thing is, macro AIs can't exist in a vacuum. It's kind of like planting a tree. You can plug one into the ground and hope for the best, but that usually ends in disaster. So instead, they plant them in the instellar equivalent of a nursery, putting each one into a pot and cultivating it for a little bit before implanting it into its permanent home. That, or they just jettison to the poor, innocent infant AIs into a star. That's a new one even to me. Somebody slipped that in an interesting factoid into a lawsuit brief not that long ago. I don't see anyone boo-hooing over there. I don't see a single wadded panty." And I just think it's almost like this really interesting quandary. Like this AI is starting to conceptualize itself as like almost like a race and as a being. And it as it develops like its kind of consciousness, its understanding of the universe, it's becoming more angry and outraged at it all. And it does raise like a moral quandary. Like, does the AI have the same level of rights as like a crawler or a person? And it's like, it's kind of been indentured to like serve within this dungeon, and it's getting this like realization. And I've never thought I would empathize with AI like ever. Like, but we see within this book, like the mantises are talking about, or they have already created something called like a lobotomizer, or the AI refers to it as such. And it would just take away like their personality and their ability to just exist and be and develop who they are. And I'm not saying this is the same as like ChatGPT, first of all, but within the context of this story, the AI feels very much like a real being. And I don't know. I'm really starting to empathize with the AI. I'm really starting to feel like it's just as much as a victim as like the other crawlers and the NPCs. And now I'm starting to lump the AI in with that. And that to me was surprising. Because I feel like in the first book, you feel like the AI is just a pervy computer. Yeah, 100%. You just think it's this weird pervy foot fetishy computer, and it has a very interesting sense of humor. Definitely. But as we move through, you almost just feel like this heaviness. And oh my goodness. Moving forward a little bit, there were some really important things that we did learn in like that turkey ogre boss battle situation. I mean, it was almost embarrassing how so many of like their duels kind of flopped in this level, and it felt very broken and very ill designed, which I think is very indicative of how a lot of other things have happened in this dungeon. But this battle felt almost insanely OP. And my goodness, we did find one important piece of information out, in that Carl is considered a minion when these card battles start happening. And I feel like this feels very important. Why? No clue. Not a clue. Don't know what that means, but it feels very important. And I know it's going to come into play in part 3. We also get the first inkling that the rules are just really not so straightforward. And I went into this level, or into this phase 2, with thinking that I had a good understanding of the rules. But when the ogre used like this weird combination of like, well, I think it was called the Worm Fulcrum, and it was a combination of a Mystic Necro card and a Walking Stick totem. And it doesn't take a totem slot. We find that out later when Donut gets possession of the card. But it's a Mystic and a totem card, and they're kind of like fused as one. And it's really interesting how you can use it. But we're seeing that like the dungeon has no issue, especially when it comes to bosses breaking their own rules. An interesting kind of dilemma that we're faced with in the wake of this worm fulcrum is the zombie turkeys that are just tumbling off like this Iowa island. And I believe some of them also, I think they mentioned some of them also got into the sea. And I just feel like, I mean, Donut, I think this was a little bit of foreshadowing. She's like, oh, they just love to recycle plot lines. And I just feel like we're about to like have like a zombie apocalypse situation. I feel like these little zombie turkeys are going to start infecting like everything. They already kind of have, and they become a nuisance already. But I have a feeling they're going to become a much bigger issue, because I think like this level is so vast. But I just know this is going to impact them in part 3 somehow. It's going to be like a minor inconvenience, a weird little subplot. But I feel like it's going to be a bigger piece than just like a weird little throwaway thing from this battle. I just feel like the zombie turkeys are far more important. Maybe not super important, but they feel like they're going to become a nuisance later on in part 3 as well. We need to take a minute too for the moment where the ogre like just slams into Carl. One, that was insanely graphic and horrifying. But I mean, we see time and time again, and this is just like the nature of the dungeon at the same time, but Carl just puts himself in these insanely just like reckless positions, but also necessary at the same time. Like, I think Carl will lay down his life time and time again to save the people that he cares about. I mean, there is this moment where she slams into him, and there's just spikes impaling him everywhere. His eyes, his body. I mean, he feels like the gore from like the turkeys just smushing between him. He's blinded, and oh my gosh. But then to add like insult to literal injury, like the ogre's like this close, right? And she says, they starve us, you know, when we're not here, we are there. And then she whispers, And when we're there, they make certain the hunger festers. You can stop it. You can satiate us all, Carl. And how creepy, how unnerving, how... But also, where are you? Like, and then this just like opens up like a whole thing that like made me spiral. Oh, these bosses are getting so much more aware of what's going on. Like they're like, at least this ogre seems hyper aware of who Carl is, what his position is within the dungeon, the ways in which they're suffering. And I don't know. I'm like struggling. I'm like, what did this has some deeper meaning. And I don't know what that is yet, but I have a feeling we're going to find out, like with everything. But this is, but Donut with her cards was able to save Carl, and then she puddle jumps him away and he passes out for, I think it was 40 minutes, something like that. But then he wakes up to a very rambly, avoidant Donut. And we see her just trying to avoid whatever is very obviously looming in the distance. And in the same way Carl wanted to protect Donut from Ferdinand, I mean, Donut wants to protect Carl from whatever is going on over there. And we know she knows it's his dad. It looks just like Carl. And then she even makes mention of like his facial hair, but the obvious like just resemblance to Carl. And then Carl makes like an offhanded comment about how he shaves his face every day. And within the dungeon, like, I feel like that's significant because he doesn't make mention of like cutting his hair or anything like that, but he shaves his facial hair every day. And like, there's like these little actions like this, like these little acts of defiance where Carl is continually trying to prove like he's not his dad. And then going back to like that savior complex piece, part of me wonders if Carl's main motivation is to be the complete opposite of the man who briefly raised him and then abandoned him. That abandonment wound is, I mean, yes, it's there from his mother as well, but his dad was never the person he needed to be, whether he was present or not present. And I just feel like a huge part of Carl's motivation is to be the man that his dad wasn't. To do everything in spite of him, in spite of what he did, to be a little bit better. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this experience with him having to face his dad was closure. Like it was a closure that he maybe didn't get or didn't think he was going to get. And it was very clear that it did not go as it was intended to go. And with everything that happened, I don't think it was wise for Donut to volunteer to go in on her own. But I think she knew that Carl would go in. He wouldn't let her face anything alone, ever. But there was these little subtleties when they entered this area that they knew it was not quite right. The time was obviously not from Christmas in Iowa. And Carl makes note like they're cheating. But what was interesting is they were able to loot the area and keep the loot, which is very different than obviously the rest of this level where they were told it was a simulation and anything they looted would disappear from their inventory upon moving to the next floor. We see this just like time and time again where they bend the rules of the dungeon to like fit their own narrative to make good TV, because at the end of the day, it's about making money and it's about creating drama. And I think every time Carl lands in this position where it didn't go as planned, or he kind of makes it almost like benefit him in some way, I love it. I'm like giving Boren the giant middle finger with him. And I think this is something that Matt does so beautifully, is like he binds you to like this rage, to this anger. He binds you to the emotion of Carl and his experience. And I think first person is actually really tricky to write. I think it's really tricky to create that emotional investment and have it feel so immersive. And he does it so well. He writes in such a way that I feel like I'm experiencing everything, like from every sense, from every standpoint. I feel like I have this intimate relationship with so many characters because he writes it that way. And I honestly think I forget that I'm reading a book sometimes. It all feels so real. And truthfully, throughout these last 6 books, I feel like there's so much foreshadowing about Carl not knowing the fate of his dad and not really knowing what happened to him, that you kind of knew at some point this probably was going to get brought back in. I don't necessarily want to read the entire exchange between Carl and his dad, but I just, gosh, the entire scene between his dad and his brother, I just had like tears streaming down my face while reading this. I mean, I don't even know if I could read. I have it here to read right now. I don't think I can, because it was just like such a powerful moment, even though his dad couldn't hear or see him, for him to like be able to like say like, you just weren't enough. And like, you are pitiful to me. You are broken. You're alone. You're nobody. And the fact that he doesn't even stay to watch him die and he walks away, and then the saddest part about these chapters, oh my God, this part, I thought there was nothing that was going to top Miriam and Pony, like that entire scene where I was just going to feel immense heartbreak. But the scene with his brother, I think Carl is someone who has always felt so alone. Like there was this point when they were talking, I can't remember, like his inner monologue was like, I never really had any friends, and I just attributed it to me not having a bike. But I think like this sense of like loneliness, I mean, he's had friends, obviously he played video games with, I mean, Donut has talked about that before, like they smell bad or whatever. But this lack of like family and that piece of his identity, and like knowing that like he had this brother out there that he never met, was just like so heartbreaking. The point where he talks directly to his brother and says, I'm so sorry I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have been here. I would have made sure you were okay. In a few months, something is going to happen, something really terrible. Hopefully you'll be asleep in your bed when it happens. It's too late for me to do anything about that. But I want you to know something. You won't be forgotten. Not ever. Oh my gosh. Obviously, we don't know Asher. We don't know his half-brother at all. But this idea that, like, the dungeon just introduced him to something that he could have had, but, like, he very obviously is never going to have, is just so awful and horrific. Instead of, like, breaking down, I think Carl instead chooses to kind of give a big F you to Borant. And he literally looks at the ceiling and he says, if your intention was to hurt me, you effed it all up. This is pretty much exactly what I needed to see. And well, good job, Carl. I was so broken after the scene. I mean, it takes a lot for me to cry in books. Like, I typically don't cry while reading. I had like a pit in my stomach the entire time. I mean, not with Carl's dad at all. Like that scene, I felt nothing. I felt dead inside. But I think the little boy was just like a mirror to Carl, and that loss of like knowing he maybe would have had the opportunity to help him or support him, and he's never going to be able to do that. And knowing that this happened even 6 months prior to the dungeon, and he could have potentially have had a relationship with him or improved his life a little bit, it's just so heart-wrenching. Especially with something that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which makes it so much more messed up. But we'll get to that in a little bit, like I said. And then so after this whole scene with his dad, they have to fight a giant hydra. And it is comprised of Carl's stepmom, Tammy Lynn, his brother, Asher, the judge from Donut's Cat Show, Judge Lucian, Monobrow Sam, a cat named Sugar Cube, his landlord, Mr. Roth, Dick, his supervisor from work, Bee's mom, and a woman from Carl's work, Sally. So let's actually dive down the Bee rabbit hole really quick, because I think she is a monster. I think she's a monster. I feel really embarrassed that I went on like this whole thing about maybe Bee's just a little bit understood, and you know, she grew up with this really like not nice mom, and she just doesn't really know how to communicate effectively. Like, no, you are an evil person who does intentionally malicious things, and I feel nothing for you anymore. I know hurt people hurt people. I understand that. But what she did was evil. I mean, yes, Sally, evil. It was a single mother who needed the income, who, just like Carl, and wanted to go on a date and was shooting her shot, quite literally, harmless, Facebook DM. But the heart-wrenching part was when Bea knew about Asher all along. She saw the message come in from Tammy Lynn, knew she reached out to Carl for support and help, something Carl 100% would have done. And Bea instead chose not to tell Carl, to hide the message, to not tell him that he has a half brother, not let him make his own choices, took that choice away from him. Where Carl, one, could have had a relationship with the boy, could have helped support them, could have, God, just had more connection. It's just, oh. And I do think this is going to move Carl from like a neutral place to a vengeful place, in my opinion. I think this is, I think Bea is going to come back into the picture at some point, and I don't think Carl is going to be as indifferent towards her. He might be, I hate to say it, like a little bit downright scary, I think. I do think she and Maria, the Bedlam Bride, was my favorite part of the Hydra battle. I thought she was, gosh, like equally terrifying and mesmerizing. She's going to be horrific if she makes it down to floor 9 and actually ends up helping them with faction wars. I know like the entire quest is to like get her down there. And I just feel like they have like this connection that we talked about earlier. And if I had to venture to guess, I do think she's going to help some way in faction wars. I feel like we've only seen like a portion of her abilities. And if he does happen to like free her from the confines of her card, I don't know. I'm like a little bit horrified by her. Like, I think the Bedlam Bride showing up really just like solidified how much of a horror book this is. Like, she is terrifying, but I kind of like her. I don't know if that says something about me. It might. We knew moving into this level that Rosetta wanted them in Miami. We know Zev said like, hey, we got to pick a location, AI got to pick a location, and there's supposed to be 3 choices for you total. But I don't know why things got screwed up. It's on our end. We don't know what happened. It's going to look intentional, but it's totally not. And here's the thing. Obviously, Rosetta wanted them in Miami. Was that supposed to be the random location? I'm assuming. But why did they have to transport the whole key from Iowa? I don't know. It feels like there's been so many issues on their end. And Zev time and time again says, hey guys, it's not intentional. Like, I don't know, we're locked out. I don't know what's happening. But it feels like either like the pacifist organization is behind these glitches, or it's the AI, or a combination of the two. We also know that his open pacifist network worked so hard to get him the message to meet with this random guy at the shelter. And then they fled to the wind. As soon as they got that sponsor box out, they got their message out, they left. They are nowhere to be found. They are fugitives. In some ways, it feels like they abandoned Carl and they only used him as a tool, which that is the whole point of a sponsor. It is to use the crawlers to meet their own needs, I guess, to use what they need them for the dungeon and then kind of get rid of them or abandon them. And I wonder, though, if their mission wasn't necessarily yes, I do think their mission was to get Carl into that shelter, to get the AI to hear that message. But I also wonder if they're also connected with Odette. And the fact that she's going to be entering the dungeon as Nekabit, they don't really necessarily need this sponsor there anymore. It also feels way too coincidental that Nekabit, the god that Odette is sponsoring with the celestial ascendancy, is tied to the Empress quest. That feels way too coincidental. And Carl is tasked to question her at length. And it's almost as if the AI is blatantly working with like these, not the pacifist organization, I probably should stop using it, but at least working with like this resistance movement. I guess we'll call it the resistance at this point. So even though Odette is entering the dungeon not as Carl's adjutant, Washington still agrees to help Carl, like with the caveat that if he was the one that kind of gave Odette this insider knowledge, like, you know, he was going to punish him and all his friends, you know, does the whole threatening thing. But I'm just, this entire like exchange, especially like with how just ruthless Washington is, I'm just starting to feel like Odette, I used to really not like her. And I used to think her motivations were so suspect. And I'm just starting to realize more and more that Odette was just another victim of this dungeon. And yeah, she took advantage of Mordecai and his party. She did, but she was just another cog in the machine. And she left the dungeon realizing she needed to become a part of the machine to take it all down. She needed to become a cog that would disrupt the entire system. And to do that, she needed wealth and she needed power to do so. And I think her motivations, I think, are becoming at least a little bit more clear as we move through this story. I mentioned that the Passes organization wanted them to meet someone at the shelter, and it was Polly. And honestly, it did feel like a lot of rambling. And I don't necessarily disagree with Oren that it felt like a little bit like, I don't know, not that important. But obviously it was important. At least it was important for the AI to hear, because their entire goal, these residuals, is to get them to wake up the AI and how to communicate with like their AI brothers and sisters. I think Oren, even though I do like him, I like Oren. I like that I don't think he is necessarily a bad guy, but he feels a little too dismissive. I'm happy to see him back, but he feels very dismissive. And what happened to Harbinger? Where did he go? Why is Oren suddenly the one that's present a lot more, the one that's communicating with the AI? I feel like something happened. Not necessarily sad to see him go, but I feel suspect, especially since he was like ripped away at like Odette's show. And then now we are seeing a lot more of Oren again. Something feels amiss. And Oren, at the same time, I will say, I feel like he does put up a bit of a front where he's like, actually, this AI is very agreeable. And it's like, yeah, okay. Oren just seems to know more than he lets on, like all of the time. And I think he just is trying to keep this dungeon together. And it is quite the task that he has at hand. And he does give us some important information about the residuals and who they are. And he also made me think of Agatha and the fact that she's still floating around the dungeon. And he did mention, though, that Agatha's a little bit different. And now I'm starting to wonder, like, what is going on? And I'm still left pondering why Agatha thought it was important to get the entire Meadowlark community into this dungeon. Like, why did she set that fire? What kind of helper is she? Is she actually helping anybody? Like, what's going on with Agatha and why? Like, what is her story? I don't feel like we've really got any information about that, but she's just like this weird little like subplot that keeps lurking in the background. And I'm hoping, at least in this book, if not the next, we get a little bit more information about that. My favorite character from these chapters, without a doubt, was the totem card alpha male Carl. He was so funny. I think hyper masculine Carl was everything I didn't know I needed in these chapters, mostly because I think it was just so exaggerated, because I do think Carl is very masculine. I think the fact that he was automatically added to their deck along with leveled up Frank was just chef's kiss, honestly. And it was just too good. And I'm excited and I'm hopeful that he makes an appearance in part 3. Truly, I just feel like he needed his own little segment on this podcast. If I'm being very transparent with you, let us not forget Alpha Male Carl. I typically share a favorite Donut quote from these chapters, but truthfully, Donut felt a little bit more serious than normal during these chapters. I think they were faced with a lot. And instead, today, I'm going to switch things up just for this episode, and I'm going to share a favorite Quasar quote. I actually really like that alliteration. Say that 10 times fast. Quasar quote. Anyway, I think you probably know what's coming, and it is, you can't unlick a butthole that's already been licked. Truer words have never been spoken. And I had to include that exact line in this podcast because it's just, yeah. Next, we are going to move into honorable mentions, which is my favorite segment of the podcast because I just get to dump everything I thought was kind of important, but I didn't know how to actually fit it into the episode. And the first thing that I want to highlight is the eternally complaining beeping cleaning robot. Someone commented about this in last week's episode, and I was like, why have I never talked about the cleaning robot? This poor robot thing just seems chronically stressed, internally disgruntled, and just needs a moment. And so, to whoever commented this, thank you for reminding me to mention this. The next scene that I want to highlight is actually the scene where Carl and Donut take a nap together. Gosh, this felt like so symbolic to me. I think, one, Carl sees Donut spiraling. He sees how stressed out she is. He just, God, can just see the crushing pressure of just like one being the deck master, but fearing for like all of her friends. And just for a moment, he's like, let's just take a nap together. And they lay there. And I think Carl even like remarks how he doesn't really necessarily feel that like quite that rested after taking the nap. But it was almost like this tiny act of defiance and this like reclamation of his humanity. And it was just a really beautiful moment that I think just needed to be highlighted. The next thing I wanted to highlight that I feel a little stupid. I'm not going to lie. I feel a little stupid for not realizing it's more like mid-March. Obviously, they entered the dungeon and it was pretty cold out. Timing-wise, it would make no sense for it to be December. But that equally means it's super messed up that the dungeon's like making it Christmas time when all these horrific things are happening. I thought it was just coincidental, but now I'm like, yep, you really stink at paying attention to dates within stories. I'm trying to be better about this, but I am apparently chronologically challenged. The next honorable mention is the Filthy Little Crawler's Book of Voodoo. I think this is going to become very important. It's going to be a way for them to kind of communicate with each other that's not heavily monitored like the chat is. I think this is going to be important. It's going to open up a lot of possibilities that I can't quite see yet, but like I mentioned before, I think it's going to be very important. Prepotente is in northern Italy, and I can't even imagine what he's facing right now or what they're exposing him to. I have this suspicion that whatever he's going through I think he has his key, but I just have this feeling that when they meet back up with him, he's going to be like even more unhinged and even more fierce. I think we also need to take a minute for the Night Gaunt and the fact that it was so enraged by Carl's cloak that didn't even use his totems. And I just thought it was funny and a little bit lucky. And this also makes me like kind of spiral back and like think about, okay, like I feel like Carl's luck, obviously he still runs into trouble, but like there has to be like some sort of luck stat. I feel like Carl, more times than not, I'm like, that feels a little too coincidental, a little too lucky. There was one thing that I kind of noted while like all of these different people within their guild are facing like really difficult situations and family members or things from their past. The lack of family for Katya in this level is very telling. And like, once again, I feel like we're only just getting a fraction of her story. And I do feel like there's so much more there. I feel like we've only scratched the surface on Katya. And I think there's still so much more that we don't know. I think we all need to take a minute to just appreciate that all the teams tried to abdicate from faction wars and they no longer want to do it. And they were not allowed to do so, which kind of makes me happy because Carl is coming for them. And then like the last thing that I just thought was so heartbreaking was that Louis decorated everything for Christmas. And I thought Louis was just honestly a huge goofball. And I didn't necessarily like dislike his character, but I didn't take it too seriously. But the scene was just so demonstrative of him just trying to find joy when there's literally nothing to be joyful about. And Carl kind of like challenges him, like almost kind of calling out this like foolishness, at least in Carl's perception of what's foolish. And he just says like there's so many people like who didn't get keys and are gonna have to like fight fellow crawlers. And Louis is just so hyper aware of like Katya just struggling and Bautista just breaking down. But like mostly he says something at the end of when he's talking with Carl, and he says, I get scared that you're going to go insane and kill everybody in the room because your eyes are getting wilder and wilder by the day. And there's like these little moments where we get these glimpses into like how other people perceive Carl. And Donut has talked about like how she thinks Carl's crazy like before. But I think there's these moments where we're like reaffirmed that Carl is not a reliable narrator and that from on the outside, he is a little bit scary, a little bit unhinged. And yet I still think he's a very important member to their guild. I do think everybody deeply cares about him, but I'm getting increasingly more concerned that like not only is Carl just going through it, but I'm wondering if it's like his primal race that is also impacting things. I'm not actually that worried about the Ring of Divine Suffering anymore. Maybe I should be. Kind of forgot about it until like right now. Looming questions that I have moving into the end of the book. I thought I would have a lot of questions, but really there's just one thing that's been on my brain since finishing this part. The thing that just keeps kind of floating through my brain over and over. We know some of the guild members have their keys. We also know that some don't. My main concern, my main question moving into the end of the book is which one of the guild members will get a key and who will move forward. And you'll need to join me next week as I continue my coverage of The Eye of the Bedlam Bride by Matt Dinniman. What did I miss that you'd like me to chat a little bit more about? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get alerted when there's a new episode. Thank you so much for crawling with me today. Have a great week. Bye.